Good day, dear friends. My name is Lucas, and I'm a little under the weather, so excuse my voice. But I recently watched Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it's still fresh in my mind, so I wanted to make a review video. I've never done that before on this channel, but the series upon which this show is based is very dear to my heart. So I had a lot of thoughts about it, and I figured why not share it if it's still fresh, and hopefully some people get something out of it. So let's get right into it. To get started, I quickly wanted to speak a bit about the original show. So in 2005, Avatar: The Last Airbender aired on the Nickelodeon network. This is a kids TV show network, and when I grew up, this is what we watched on TV all the time. This was before we had streaming, and we would see episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender pop up all the time, and it kind of didn't fit with the other shows that we were watching as children. Because even though this is a kids show, it is also deeply insightful. It is deeply transformative for many people when they watch it. And it's such a peculiar thing that something that started out as a kids show has turned into such a big phenomenon. It's famously one of the best rated TV shows in the world, according to IMDb. And you can watch it as a child and really enjoy it. And then you can watch it again as an adult and see how much depth there actually is to this show. Without going too in depth, I want to quickly explain the premise of this show. So in the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender, there are 4 elements: water, earth, fire, and air. And there are 4 nations which are linked to these elements. Within these nations, there are certain people who can bend the elements. So you have earthbenders and you have firebenders. They can basically control this element. So the earthbenders can, for example, bring earth into the sky and they can control it and they can build houses with it. And firebenders can shoot fire and vice versa for the water and airbenders. And in this world, there is always an incarnation of the Avatar. And the Avatar is someone who controls all 4 elements. And this said individual, in this case, is named Aang. And he is an airbender. And the story starts with him finding out that he is the Avatar and he has to restore balance to the world. And he finds this such a big responsibility that he runs away from it. And as he runs away, his entire home gets burned down by the Fire Nation and a genocide takes place. And this is a kids TV show, like it's very heavy stuff. He continues to get frozen inside of a wave because he's in a very heavy storm as he runs away from home. And 100 years pass, and basically the Fire Nation has yielded war over the 4 nations for these last 100 years, and now he comes back into this world and he has this gigantic responsibility of stopping this war. And the Fire Nation is basically this Roman Empire or Third Reich that wants to control the entire world. So you can already see that topics like genocide and war are very central in this show. I think they do such a good job of finding lightheartedness inside of the show because it is a kids show, but also really showcasing how important and deep and I guess impactful in negative and positive ways some of these topics can be. They can be extremely bonding, but they can also break people apart, and that's showcased very well. A lot of people in this show have experienced great loss of people in their lives, but also a loss of home and a loss of belonging. So now we are in this torn world where there is great potential, negative, positive, and it's all lying upon the shoulders of these young kids. And I don't want to go too in depth in the story because I want this to remain accessible, but this is the main premise of the original show. And now I'd like to move on to the Netflix adaptation of this show. It largely adheres to the original premise, so everything I told you just now is easily applicable to the story, but they do make some changes, and it's always dangerous. It's always something that original fans worry about. It's always a bold move. Netflix put a lot of money into this live action show, and people initially had high expectations of this show, I myself included, and this faded very quickly as we heard that the 2 original creators of the cartoon stepped away from the show because they didn't like the direction in which it was going. So a lot of people were worried that Netflix was completely ruining the show or making it their own thing or somehow involving their politics inside of it. We didn't really know. So a lot of people, a lot of fans, they were kind of hesitant when this show came out, but I think most everyone will watch it, and I have watched it now, and I'm actually surprisingly positive about it. I initially was afraid that they would ruin the show by causing all these changes, but I'd like to go into what changes they made exactly and why, in my opinion, they succeed at creating a new story and actually, by virtue of these changes, making a different product, a different story that perhaps we shouldn't even compare to the original show. And I think that's exactly what a lot of people wanted. We didn't just want scene by scene retelling of the story. Everything would have been predictable and we would mostly watch for the visual effects. So let's get into the changes they made. For starters, the show begins, the Netflix adaptation that is, with the genocide that I spoke about before. In the original cartoon, they didn't show this at all, but here they laid an emphasis on it. So they actually show what the air nomads look like, and they show them being attacked by the Fire Nation ruthlessly. And in the original cartoon, because it's a kid TV show, the violence isn't very violent. You don't really see people burned down, but it's kind of implicit that that did happen. In the real life version, there is an emphasis laid upon this violence. You really feel the pain and the almost the senselessness of this violence and the suffering that goes along with it. Sometimes we forget that if you're a firebender, the way to kill is to burn your opponent, and this is a ruthless way to kill someone. And you see an entire people being burned down in the first episode already. I think that this beginning of the show touches upon the major change that they made, and that is that they removed a lot of the silliness. In the original show, we were talking about a kids' TV show, so it was important for it to be goofy. There was a lot of goofiness to it. It was a lot of humor that especially kids can appreciate. And they didn't remove all humor from this show. I think it's just a bit more mature. And some people really don't like this. They think that the lightheartedness and the goofiness of the original show is something that should be a part of the Netflix adaptation. But I myself could appreciate it. I think it set a different tone for the story. A tone that is so different from the original show that it feels like you're watching a different story. Now, they didn't just change moods or the general atmosphere of the show. They also changed parts of the story because they're working with 8 episodes for the first season. The original TV show is quite a bit longer, I think. Even though the episodes are shorter, they get more time to explain the story. And here they had to condense that a bit more. So you see certain characters that are really not supposed to show up so early in the story, but they show up. And I think that I was worried when I saw it at first, but then I realized that they actually did quite a good job of introducing these characters and meshing some of the story there. It didn't take away from the quality and the depth of the characters. And I think actually because there were so many episodes in the original TV show, they here got to focus more on really the relevant parts of the story, because there do seem to be some filler episodes in the original TV show. So I think this condensed aspect is a very important part of the Netflix adaptation. Another thing I noticed that I really liked is that there was more screen time for the villain, or perhaps he's not exactly the villain, but the original villain of the show. In the first season, this is Zuko. He is a 17-year-old boy who got banished from the Fire Nation because he spoke against his father in a war meeting. And he then got burnt on his face. Like, talk about trauma. This is a deeply scarred individual, both physically and mentally. And he has to capture the Avatar if he wants to win his honor back, if he wants to be welcomed back into the Fire Nation. That's how we first get introduced to him. So you see someone that portrays a lot of emotional damage in his character, and he has such rage that fuels his firebending that he's initially a character that very clearly seems to be the villain. Now, in the original show, as the seasons progress, you really see a deep transformation occurring, which I think is very powerful. And here they lay some of the focus on that already in the first season, which I think is beautiful, because it very quickly allows you to stop thinking in a binary manner. And I think that's very easy to do, especially when it comes to topics of war and of the hero's journey, where we see, for example, Aang being the main guy, and he seems to be very peaceful and a go-lucky guy, and you want him to just be the good guy, and then you want to think of the Fire Nation as bad. But quickly with this character, Zuko, you see how much more complicated that is. And it's also deeply shown in the character of Iroh, his uncle, who used to be a war general, and he used to lay siege on an Earth Kingdom city for many days, and he's taken lives. And you see in him a sort of a sage, sort of a wise guide of Zuko, who tries to, I guess, act as his conscience and act as the voice that gives him reason. And Iroh, even though he's part of the Fire Nation, he really seems to understand balance, and he understands the value of the Avatar. And you implicitly already get a bit of a sense of this in some of the first episodes, where he interacts with Aang, for example, and he already expresses that he doesn't really have the same view of the world as the Fire Lord does, Zuko's father, who is the one that wants to take over the world. One thing that the Netflix adaptation does extremely well is to portray the bending in a more realistic manner. I think a lot of people were worried about whether or not they would get this right, but it's clear that Netflix invested a lot of resources in getting the visual effects to be extremely powerful and to be an accurate portrayal of what a lot of people would want bending to look like in real life, making this show a little bit closer to reality, allowing us to imagine ourselves more clearly in this world. This is a clear difference from the cartoon show, and I think it's a powerful and a positive change in that sense. And I think this is one of the reasons why people were motivated to do this show. You can really more closely feel what it's like to be in the world of the Avatar, and I think for a lot of people it's an enchantment of their reality when they see these things happening. I think a lot of kids, including myself, when they were younger, would look at water and hold their hands up and hope that the water would move. And now we get an idea of what that actually looks like. So I think that's a wonderful implementation. One of the downsides of the Netflix adaptation is that you're also left to the whims of some of the actors, and there are a lot of inexperienced actors on this cast. I was in no way disappointed by the acting on the show, but I do think it sometimes shows that there are some kids on the show that have never acted or have rarely acted before in their lives, and some of them had to grow into the show, where I really saw some of the performances get better as the episodes progressed. But yeah, this is a vulnerability that you're going to have if you're doing a live adaptation, whereas in the cartoon you have much more power over what it's going to look like on screen. That said, I want to give a quick highlight. I think that Sokka is perfectly cast. I don't know how else you could have found a person that portrays the cartoon version that well. I think the rest of the cast in general is done quite well, even though some of them look quite different than we would expect them from the cartoon. I think most all of them have grown on me as the show progresses. One particular criticism I have is of the character of Azula. Azula is the Fire Lord's daughter. She's Zuko's sister. She's extremely fierce and cold-blooded in the original cartoon, and I just haven't seen that on screen yet in the Netflix live action. I wonder if this is because they're trying to pursue a different direction with her, but it's really not clear to me yet. Overall, I think the Netflix adaptation succeeds at doing the risky thing, that is making changes and doing so successfully, where the changes are not doing away from the quality of the show. They're actually enhancing it in some way, making it a different type of story, a story that may not speak to all the same fans as before, but it may speak to other people that could not connect with the more childlike and childish aspects of the cartoon. This live action version tries to convey the gravity of war, the gravity of the responsibility Aang has to carry, the gravity of Zuko's story, the gravity of every character and their complexities and the deep tragic aspects of their lives, as well as the good ones. They don't take away from the goodness, but they make you really aware of how difficult this situation actually is. I think that, like I said, the change that they do make is really positive in that sense. It's really something that I didn't expect and something that I'm deeply appreciative of. Today I will refrain from giving this show a grade because it's only the first season. Story-wise, it's not my favorite season of the original show, so I'm really excited to see how they play with season 2 and 3, what other changes they make, and if they are successful. Again, I think this is a very risky endeavor, but so far they have been successful, They have definitely not changed too much, and again, the changes they have made have seemed positive. So I would say good job to the creators, and I hope that it gets renewed for season 2, and we'll look forward to that.